people we've been able to actually move through our program is way lower than what BRAC has been able to do. But still, the results have been interesting. Now, like Larry said, Haiti is not Bangladesh, and so we've had to adapt the BRAC model to the reality of our country. The first thing is that in Haiti, there are no really government-run or NGO-run social programs that reach the women we work with in the ultra-poor program. And so we've had to add a housing support module to our intervention to allow these women to at least live under a roof that won't leak, to make sure they have a latrine, and to provide them with a filter so that they can drink clean water. That's the first thing. We've had to add this because it's essential to the self-esteem of the members, and there was really no other way for them to have access to that kind of support. The income generation activities, we have also had to adapt that to what is feasible in Haiti. The activities we have for now are still essentially livestock-based. So it's about cows and goats and pigs and chickens and turkeys. It's also about small commerce. But bit by bit, we're trying to add other income generation activities that are not as dependent on agriculture or livestock, because agricultural and livestock are both very vulnerable to weather events, and Haiti is becoming increasingly vulnerable to catastrophic weather events. So we're trying to add other activities like, for example, knitting bags that are actually bought by partner organizations and exported to the U.S. Another possibility we've just added is the production of castor oil. Last but not least, we've had to change the program duration. Our ultra-poor program only lasts for 18 months instead of 24, and that was essentially something we did because of an attempt at reducing costs. Cost is one of the major things we're fighting with here in Haiti, because we've had to add a number of modules and because human resources in Haiti are way more expensive than in Asia in general. Our program was quite expensive to begin with. So we've been working to try and become more efficient and really work intensively with the women so that they can graduate after 18 months. So that was, in a couple of words, the description of how we in Fonkoze have adapted the ultra-poor model to our reality here.
That's great. Thank you very much, Karen. And very interesting to see how a different context requires some adaptations to the basic model. So, Raymond, you're in Negros in the Philippines, and you're looking to see if you might be able to implement something like this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization, the Negros Women for Tomorrow Foundation, why you're looking at this, and then you can start asking questions of Corinne and Sadna about how you might go about starting to implement this program in Negros.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Thanks, Sadna and Corinne, for those very interesting presentations. I'm Raymond from Negros Women for Tomorrow Foundation in the Philippines. We're basically a microfinance organization operating in Central Philippines. We've been here, we've operated Grameen methodology for the last 25 years. And right now we have around 175,000 clients in around 70 branches. So moving forward, those presentations were great. BRAC highlighting what it does best in terms of the graduation model, and then Fonkoze doing a very good job replicating it. Just have several questions for you guys we ourselves, NWTF, is very interested in looking at this and perhaps moving forward and see what we can replicate it as well. The first thing is with BRAC or Fonkoze, working as a microfinance, working in the microfinance field for so long. What has been the main motivation for you guys to start this graduation model?
For us in Fonkoze, the main motivation was our mission. It was really the consideration that our microfinance program were not reaching the very poorest women who needed us most. And so we went after another methodology that could help us do that, and that's how we discovered the Ultra Poor program and replicated it. So it's essentially really mission motivated.
And I would actually echo exactly the same. Given a 30-year track record in sort of implementing microfinance at scale, it was very evident to field workers in around 2001, 2002, that there was a portion of the population that stood to gain the most from microfinance and financial inclusion that was actually being excluded, and hence the attempt to sort of try to stack a whole series of interventions over a period of 24 months to try to address the very complex and multifaceted problems that these households face.
Okay. And then going a little bit into the details of the program, what's been common in your presentations, the importance, or or at least can you expound further on the importance of targeting in this program? And perhaps for you, Karin, what has been the local context in terms of replicating? What has been different in terms of BRAC when it comes to the targeting process and targeting in your country vis-a-vis what they do with BRAC?
We're actually using the same model. The only thing is that it takes us more time because to the contrary of Bangladesh, Haiti, in rural areas, people they live scattered about. And so it takes us quite a bit of time, not so much doing the workshops with the local leaders and doing the participatory wealth ranking with them. That is really just the same methodology. What takes us time is the home visits, the home visits that come after the participatory wealth ranking. But it is absolutely essential. I mean, we have evidence that this methodology really allows us to target people who are significantly poorer than our traditional microfinance clients, and we use the poverty the progress out of poverty index, the PPI, to measure the level of poverty of these people, and it's really clear that they are way poorer than the microfinance clients. So it's a methodology that is tough. It takes quite a bit of time, but we think it's important to invest resources in carefully targeting, because it's the way we can really justify putting all the energy in saying, people, we are sure that these women would not have been able to make it through the regular microfinance program.
Okay. Yeah. And then, yeah, thanks for that. And then you were mentioning something about changing in local context the type of asset and the specific training that you were providing your client. Can you talk a little bit about this, and what things do you consider in making sure that you provide them with the right asset which would be useful to them, or the training that will be useful to them?
Mm-hmm. One of the things we learned from BRAC at the very beginning is that these women, the women we work with, really lack confidence in themselves. Mm-hmm. So when you start out working with them, you should present them with income generation activities that are really very familiar to them. You know, it has to be something they see happening in their environment and that is not too intimidating to them. And so that's why we started out with essentially goats and chickens and guinea fowl and turkeys, because that is an income generation activity a lot of people are very familiar with. One of the things that is a bit clearer with us than with BRAC, I think, is that over the course of the program, over the course of the 18 months, women transform the income generation activities they've been given. So they can start out with goats, but after 6 months, they've had enough goat kids to sell so that they can buy a calf. Or they have enough confidence to learn how to knit. You see, so it's important to maybe look at different sets of income generation activities. The first one should be really very familiar to them.
And additionally, you know, one of the things that we also try to look at when we look at, for instance, a transfer of livestock, is trying to sort of assemble a package of assets that's returning, you know, a return on a short-term, a medium, and a longer-term basis, right? So you're transferring a different bundle of livestock, or perhaps doing a livestock transfer in addition to a transfer of fertilizer and seed if the person has access to a plot of land that they can cultivate in. So a lot of what we're trying to do is really work very intimately with the client to try to understand what it is that they're suited to and inclined to do in terms of generating some revenues, what they will be successful at doing, and what will create them sort of a bundle of options that returns revenue on a short-term, medium, and a longer-term basis.
Okay. Yeah. And then moving forward, perhaps, both of you mentioned, well, what we see here is really a very focused intervention. Perhaps the process is very focused. What specific skill sets, you know, like for us at NWTF, we're an MFI, what specific skill sets is different when you implement something like a graduation model compared to like regular MFI?
I think the key person for this intervention is the case manager. It's the person in the field who will work directly with the ultra poor people and who will visit them on a weekly basis and train them and accompany them to grow their assets. We've seen that one of the key elements when you select that type of staff is that they have to have shown that they're committed to the growth and to the situation of other people in their community. So what we look for when we hire these people is we look for previous social engagements. Are they members of a church group? Have they been in a youth group? Have they been a member of a grassroots organizations working for people with disabilities? You know, anything that shows that these people are actually attentive to what happens to other people and to especially more unfortunate people in their communities.
Yeah. Okay. And then one other thing on the how do you know, what are the indicators or milestones that show that a client is progressing towards graduation, or you know, is in the right path towards graduation? And how do you communicate these things, those specific or those milestones that you were talking about? How do you communicate this to the parents?
Should I address that for BRAC?
Yeah, go ahead, Sana.
The milestones that we measure criteria against are really exactly the same criteria that we had up on the screen a little earlier. So we're looking at household reported food security. We're looking at multiple sources of income. We're looking at existence of cash savings. We're looking at a number of assets. The structural integrity of the home often in many of these projects is sort of measured by having a sort of solid roof overhead, access to clean water and sanitation. And in order to make this process incredibly transparent, the program officer, when they start to work with a client, basically has a checklist of these criteria and explains, because of lack of literacy oftentimes, what each of these things on the checklist corresponds to. And as the program manager goes back to the household on a weekly basis and they, over the course of 24 months, make progress towards that, the client themselves is able to see where they are and what they need to work on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. It's the same thing with us. Now, I think what is interesting is that this set of criteria is typically a mix of physical, practical things and actually psychological. Because one of the key aspects of graduation is that women feel they have plans for the future and they feel confident that they will be able to reach and to implement these plans. So it's really physical, both physical and psychological elements that in the end will provide the criteria for graduation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful. And then looking at the overall program, what are some? And I know you've mentioned some of the other things, but what else? What are some more things that implementing agencies or MFIs, MFI in our case, would want to consider and what would want to look at before even deciding to start this program?
Well, I think one of the key elements for microfinance institutions looking to implement this is the sort of real head-on issue that Corinne dealt with at the top of her presentation, which is cost. So if you are a sustainable microfinance institution, this is a very intensive, comprehensive, and also cost-intensive program to implement in order to make an investment in poorer communities that is mission-aligned, that will potentially provide you an additional inflow of clients down the road, but that, again, is down the road. So I think one of the key things to look at from the perspective of a microfinance institution is if you are sustainable and if you have access to grant funding or discounted or donor sources of funds, is this potentially a good use of that pool of funds in order to make an interesting kind of investment in advancing a mission down the road? Corinne?
Yes, I totally agree. I also think if you want to use a grant-funded model like what we're doing, we're essentially looking for grants to fund this program, it means you have to have the infrastructure to actually take care of those grants. With our Ultra Poor program right now, we have a group of 6 or 7 different donors. Each of the donors requires a report and specific accounting methodologies and what else. So you have to be really committed, and you have to make sure that you set up the infrastructure that is needed to manage these grants well, because it's not the same kind of accounting than if it is your own funds.
Well, Raymond, thank you for your questions here, Raymond. You've done a great job in generating lots of other questions from the participants in the call, so I appreciate that. But a lot of those questions now deal with this question of how much it costs that we've just gotten into. So I want to follow up on that. How much does this actually cost per client? And how does this benefit the MFI if they have to raise money to do this? What do you see? How does this work out long term for the microfinance institution?
Sure. So with BRAC, as well as with another implementation that's actually in a very similar context in West Bengal in India, to an MFI called Bandhan, the cost per beneficiary over the 2-year cycle of the program works out to about roughly $340. So if you look at that over a 2-year period, that's actually quite a reasonable return in terms of graduation, sustainable graduation outcomes, and in terms of the composition of that funding. Nearly half of that actually is directly going to the beneficiary in the form of the asset transfer, as well as partly the consumption stipend as well. Now, these are areas where population density is very high, and where costs of goods and assets as compared to geographies like where Karim works in Fonkoze are quite cheap. And so if you look at implementation elsewhere, the model does increase in terms of costs. So we see in Pakistan an implementation cost of roughly, I believe, $800 over the course of 2 years. And Karim can address her current cost structure at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, our program from the very beginning has been way more expensive. I mean, we started out with a cost of $1,900 per participant. Right now, we're at $1,500 per participant. And actually, the most important costs are the resource costs, which are, that's just the reality of the market in Haiti, where in general human resource costs are very, very expensive. The other thing is that our operation costs are higher just because the participants live scattered all over the rural areas of Haiti. All our case managers need a motorcycle, and the expenses of the motorcycles are quite intensive. And the third aspect is that we indeed have to tag on a number of additional expenses, such as money to redo the house and to build a latrine and provide access to water filters. So the local context really, really makes a huge difference. And to us, it's clear that the ultra poor program is at the core of what we do, is really important to our mission, but it will remain a grant funded program because there's no way a microfinance institution could pay for that level of cost.
Now, that's very interesting to see how the costs vary by location. Now, I know in many countries, governments feel responsibility for caring for people in poverty in their countries. They often receive support from international donors to do that. Are there any occasions where these ultra-poor programs are connected up with some sort of government funded program so that some of the funding comes from the government?
Yes, increasingly that is the case, and so for instance, with one of the pilots that we mentioned, funded by Ford Foundation and CGAP in Ethiopia, we had a very sort of BRAC-style NGO pilot graduation model where the consumption stipend piece, the weekly stipend that was being sort of provided to households to help cushion them as they started to learn how to produce revenues from their assets, was actually supplied by the locally provided cash transfer program, the SNP. And that really helped in the Ethiopian context to allay the cost of the model for the implementing agency, because they were able to sort of piggyback off of the consumption stipend of cash transfer being provided by the government. Interestingly, we're also seeing that when we speak with several different governments, particularly in Africa, who are interested in the approach, there is a bit of a increasing interest that we see in terms of not just looking at the whole scope implementation of graduation, but trying to see it's possible in government social protection programs to try to onboard elements of the skills training and the healthcare components to sort of try to crowd in a more comprehensive intervention around cash transfer or food for work programs. So we find that to be heartening as well.
Great. Now, I've gotten some questions about, because this is a very intensive program providing a full range of services and assets, seems like there may be feelings of discrimination or being left out in a community if, you know, if the ultra poor get chosen, but the next level of poverty up doesn't get chosen. How do you deal with that, and how do you avoid people faking it to try and get into the program?
Sure. So a key part of that really has to do with the village level poverty targeting that happens, of which you saw a picture and Corinne also spoke about. When you sort of call the entire community together and run them through an exercise of mapping who lives where, who is this person connected to, what is their situation, where you have the kids of the community who are around that map sort of helping to populate it, and where community elders sort of walk the rest of the community members through the exercise of selecting who are the most needy, despite the fact that sometimes some of that data is a little bit skewed. And that sort of comes out in the household visits that BRAC staff and Fonkoze staff do when they go to try to verify these details. There is a sense that the community did participate in these decisions and helped to identify the individuals that ended up being beneficiaries. So from the get-go, there is that sense of community buy-in at some level. And secondly, the involvement of the program officer, the case manager, is the terminology that Fonkoze uses. Their sort of weekly involvement in the community, sort of going in, is not just a function of them working with that household, but sort of building awareness and support for the work that they're doing within those communities that all leads up to the formation of a village-level poverty reduction committee that then attempts to carry on the work that BRAC staff has done over the course of the 24 months.
Mm-hmm. I think what I can add to what Pratna just said is also that there is jealousy in the community. There is no question about that. We even have some of our regular clients saying, "Ooh, this woman was so badly off and now she's better off than I am. Why don't I get those too?" So it's just something that needs to get managed over the course of the program. And there's two things we've learned that are very helpful. One, like Satnam said, you have to be very, very rigorous with your selection, and you have to be able to document using poverty measurements that you are indeed selecting ultra-poor people. That's one. The second element we found very helpful is that we work with the village assistance committees. And those are local leaders who actually, from the very beginning, agreed to help these ultra-poor women on their roads, on their first steps out of poverty. And one of the roles these village assistance committees accomplish is that they manage conflicts. They manage, and we actually train them for that. And they play a key role in communicating about the program and making sure that whenever conflicts arise, they're actually dealt with in a constructive way. Very good. And have you found any of these principles that you've applied in the Ultra Poor program, have you found that some of them can apply in the regular microfinance program as well? We're actually, right now, what we've learned is that we see that because of the intensive follow-up, the case managers and the staff of the Ultra Poor program accumulate a very granular level of knowledge of local economy that most of the microfinance credit agents don't have because they don't have that level of involvement with their clients. And we're actually now looking at ways we can work with our microfinance institutions to make sure some of the key learnings about what works and doesn't work in the local economy, to see how we can actually share that with them and make sure that the branch staff participate in that learning.
Very good. Yeah, it's fascinating to me that this idea of both the role of mentoring that the case manager has and then the village committee, those having the whole village take responsibility and sharing in the goal of moving people out of poverty seems like great ideas and concepts that we could apply more broadly. Now, we've got a lot of questions here for you, Sadna, about impact. How long do people stay out of poverty? Does this really, once they move out, do they stay out or do they find themselves falling back in? So what evidence do you have on the longer-term outcomes and impact of these programs?
Sure. So in Bangladesh, very similar to the Fonkoze experience, we find that more than 95% of participants achieve graduation. And if you sort of drill down more specifically to the individuals that cross the 50 cent per day threshold, that's about 92%. And more significantly, we find that they sort of sustain those conditions over the next 4 years. And I believe someone asked a question earlier about percentage of backsliding. Now that does happen. These individuals who are termed graduated still live in very vulnerable conditions and are still susceptible to shocks, though we feel much more resilient to them. And we find that if we go back and do a resurvey, typically about 2% of individuals who have graduated have a bit of a backslide. And that doesn't mean that they can't sort of once again come up with the skills and some of the assets that they have received over the term of the program. And internationally, the reports from the various CGAP and Ford-funded pilots show that within the range of the programs that they run, from 18 months to 36 months, about 75 to 98% of participants meet the country-specific graduation criteria, which in most cases looks really quite similar to the criteria that BRAC uses. So more specifically, we wanted a fairly rigorous look at the impact of the graduation model on the employment choices, really, that these ultra-poor women have at their disposal, and conducted a fairly large-scale randomized control trial that was conducted by Robin Burgess, the London School of Economics, and IGC. We wanted to share with the group some of the findings of that study. So essentially, looking at whether the program transforms occupational choices, looking at over 1,400 communities where the program has been rolled out in Bangladesh, and 20 branches, BRAC microfinance branches, where the program has been administered through as a treatment group, and then controlling against a similar sample size of 20 branches where the program was not implemented. So after the 2-year cycle, a resurvey was done, and after 4 years of the start of the intervention, so 2 years after its end, another survey was performed. We're right now in the process of doing a resurvey to find how these results look over the longer term, but very interestingly, and very relevant, I think, to the microfinance space. One of the premises going into this program was that this level of poverty and these households really sort of have very few choices in terms of generating income for themselves, and perhaps not the best candidates for microfinance loans because they're not sort of equipped enough to generate income off of their own micro enterprises. And the RCT, the randomized control trial, found that a 92% increase in hours devoted to self-employment after 4 years, and significantly a simultaneous 26% decrease in hours devoted to wage labor. So wage labor in this context is really mostly working as domestic aids and earning roughly about 50 cents a day, in many cases not actually the physical sum, but instead getting paid in kind, in food, often just rice for that equivalent amount. The rest of these three indicators here look at really an evening out of some of those work hours, so a 15% increase in days of work per year after 4 years, a 26% decrease in hours of work per day, and simultaneously an increase in productivity, right? So 15% increase in income per hour of work after 4 years. So another sort of way to look at this is that if you look at this as the intervention period, and if you look at this sort of 2 years on, and if this is the treatment group, the participants that were in the program, and this is the treatment, 4 years after the start of the program, the portion of participants who are entirely self-employed increases from 30% to nearly half. So these are sort of primed microfinance clients in many ways. No notable change among the control, and the percentage of participants relying solely on wage labor declines from 26% to 6%, and we hope that that sort of correlates to a much greater range of choice and agency and resilience in terms of how these households are earning income, a reduction in seasonality, and more even hours allocated across days. If you look at the total earnings picture, we find that among participants shown here in pink, a 33% increase in earnings within the program cycle, and a 38% increase 4 years hence, and certainly higher gains than the controls, about an 8- or 9-fold increase in savings after 2 and 4 years. Consumption rates go up 8% within the cycle, and 15% 4 years on, and a 38% increase in investment in land after 4 years. And important to note that much of that is actually leasing land. So overall, there were certainly changes in occupational choices that were actually accompanied by an increase in income, expenditure, and food security for the households that participated.
Oh, that's great. I remember hearing Esther Duflo talk about these results, and she said something like, these are about as good as it gets when you're doing RCA work, that these are pretty extraordinary results.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we're coming to the close of our hour. I want to ask you, Sadhna, what's next for BRAC? How do you look to expand this model, and what can you do for people who want to try to implement it in their own countries?
Great. So in terms of what's next for BRAC, we're moving forward full steam with our own implementation of the graduation program in Bangladesh and elsewhere, with a commitment within the next 2 years alone. And this is sort of in service of the goal to eliminate poverty by 2030 of 250,000 households by 2016, and more coming in priority countries like Uganda and Tanzania. And with the generous support of the Errol Foundation and a partner in San Francisco, a social impact agency called Amplifier Strategy, we're looking at ways to expand our advocacy of the graduation model. So this really involves developing very specific technical guides and toolkits for organizations, NGOs, governments, and microfinance institutions who are interested in implementing the program. We're also looking at ways to build greater awareness and advocacy around the model through conducting national workshops to help practitioners connect with policymakers in their local country context to figure out how to actually intersect policy approaches with graduation approaches to deliver sustainable outcomes for ultra-poor populations. And we're committed to providing technical assistance and consultation where requested. As Karine mentioned, we had seconded staff over to Fonkoze for extended periods of time. We're happy to come with you, work with you, design missions, think through the program, cost it out with you. Please contact us. And along those lines, we really feel that the value of the graduation program is best sort of understood when it's seen in action. So we'd like to invite you to Dhaka during the last 3 weeks of August to really immerse in the program, to take a deep dive, and to sort of witness some of the transformational work that can happen in the lives of the ultra-poor. And if you're interested in doing that, please drop me an email.
That's great. And at the Microcredit Summit campaign, looking at this goal, industry-wide goal of seeing 100 million families move out of extreme poverty, we've been working with organizations who are making commitments about what they're going to do over the next 12 to 18 months. So what's BRAC's commitment, Sadhna?
So our commitment is really in terms of our own direct implementation, 250,000 households by the end of 2016, and we hope that that's conservative. We are looking at the end of this year to release a full implementation guide to be used by management individuals and sort of project manager level staff at various implementing agencies on exactly how you unpack and train your staff on how to implement an approach like this. We're also committing to providing technical assistance and consultation as requested on a needs basis. And we're committing to creating a biannual immersion program, which invites practitioners, policymakers to come and see it in action.
That's great. Great. Well, it's good to see you supporting others in applying this model. It's time for us to wrap up, but I want to ask the panelists on the line if you can stay on a little longer. Now, Raymond, I know it's midnight for you, so you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you can stay on a little longer, there were lots more questions, and I'll give you a chance to ask them for those who can stay on. But before we do, a few announcements from us. Our next webinar is on June 24th at 10 a.m. East Coast time. And it's about the Progress Out of Poverty Index certification relaunch. So this is an important tool for those who want to be able to make sure they're reaching the people that they're targeting and measuring progress over time. So that webinar will feature Grameen Foundation, Microfinance Rating, and Planet Rating. Also, the Microcredit Summit State of the Campaign report will, for 2014, will be launched June 19th. And for those of you in the DC area, we're going to launch it at Busboys and Poets, which is a great location in DC. The report will look deeply at industry efforts to build client resiliency, and we hope you'll be able to join us for that event. All right, so those of you that have to go, time's up, and you can go now. But if Sadhna or Corinne and Raymond, if you can stay on, we've got lots more questions here. Is that all right?
Yeah. No problem, Commissioner.
Okay. So one question is has to do with working in multi-ethnic and multi-religious, multi-racial communities. This sort of requires a lot of community support and people working together and not seeing the benefit going to someone as something taken away from them. So have you seen this work in those sorts of communities?
Yes. So in Bangladesh, there are certainly, I mean, as Corinne mentioned, there is sort of localized questions and tensions about sort of which ethnic groups and why this beneficiary versus myself. And we see that with some of the targeting that happens elsewhere. As well, and here again, it's very important to underscore the value of documentation, as Corinne mentioned, as well as being incredibly transparent and inviting about the process of conducting a village-level wealth ranking exercise and laying the groundwork. So our program officers sort of go into the field in the weeks before actually conducting one of these wealth ranking exercises to help speak to the community, to help them understand what is about to happen, and then sort of plant the seed for that process. So, you know, the sort of short answer is there often will be some level of tension about these issues. In Bangladesh, one of the key sort of misunderstandings about the approach that came up in early years of its implementation was that, you know, this is, a Christian organization attempting to provide services in order to proselytize. And over time, the community really does begin to understand what's happening here. And if a transparent process is pursued. And if that's done with integrity and deep and consistent points of contact within the community, eventually the value of the program does surface.
Very good. Another question here is about monitoring and evaluation systems that you use. Now, Corinne, I know that Fonkoze has integrated both the PPI, the Progress Out of Poverty Index, and the Food Security Survey, but you also talked about measuring clients' own sense of confidence. So what are the tools you use to measure progress?
We use PPI and food security with a sample of these clients, just because they enter into our general database of women we follow through the years as they go through our program. But on top of that, we have a specific tool. It's actually taking the graduation criteria and making sure we stay on top of where the women are at towards these goals. So one of them is indeed something, it's kind of a self-confidence scale. We ask the women when they join on a scale from 1 to 10 in terms of how you feel in your life right now. Where do you put yourself? And most of the women, when we find them, they would rank themselves on the 0 or 1 kind of level of that ladder we describe to them. And then we do it again with them, like 9 months later, and then close to graduation. They have to have the confidence that they actually can manage their own life. And most of them really end the program on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th rung of that ladder towards 10 and feeling good in their lives.
Very good. And are there tools that they use themselves to measure their own progress?
They have the objectives. From the very beginning, we tell them, okay, the objective is that you live in a house that doesn't leak, that you have at least 1 hot meal a day, that all your kids are in school, that you can go to the hospital when you need to. So they actually, from the very beginning, have these goals spelled out in a little book they keep at their home. And every time a case manager comes, he writes something in that book in terms of follow-up and how they're doing on the road towards the graduation. But yeah, the majority of the women who enter our CLM program are illiterate. So they learn how to write their name and recognize basic letters before they finish the program. But they can't, at the end of the program, they don't necessarily fully read and write.
All right. And Sadna, what is used in Bangladesh and other places that you know of?
So in many ways quite similar. And again, the target population is often has very basic numeracy skills and often illiterate. In terms of their engagement in the community, you know, one measure that we find to be very effective in terms of giving us a bit of a report back on some of the softer elements of whether a household is really sort of engaging with markets and with their communities is through the feedback that we get from the village level committees that are organized. And because these individuals and those leaders have sort of been cultivated by the program managers along the way, they almost become extension agents who are able to really report back and provide a good sense of where households are. So if now, you know, I mean, I've been in the field in Bangladesh where we go and visit clients who are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years graduated. And if you go back with that same program organizer, that program organizer is able to identify the individuals in that village who will provide a full scope history of this person's progress since graduation. And of course, you're able to meet with that client, and that relationship is very strong between the program manager and the client as well. So there are sort of inbuilt feedback loops.
Now, Corinne, you mentioned the difficulty with livestock, that often clients are vulnerable with the death of livestock or problems in their growing. Is there any coverage for that? Is there any insurance? Or what happens if the animal dies?
It does. What we've done, we've changed a few of the ways we actually work with livestock. Like we've stepped away from bigger coops of chicken to doing more local style chickens that are, for one, they are very prized, and so the price they actually give when you sell them is higher. But also, because they're ranging, they're less vulnerable to illnesses. So we've changed some of the ways we work with livestock to make the members, the CLM members, more resilient. The second thing is that we've got a very active partnership with Heifer International. They've helped us in two ways. One is that they've actually trained some of our own people in how to better take care of livestock. And two, they have also trained the village assistance committees so that they can recognize certain key illnesses and can take care of ill livestock, because that was one of the key problems they had, was that in rural Haiti, it's difficult to find quality veterinary care. So more and more we've been building up to make sure we create an ecosystem around the members where access to veterinary care becomes easier, where the vet agents that are there have access to the drugs they need. So bit by bit, it's also that kind of partnership that need to be built up.
Okay. And one other question here, and then we'll wrap it up. What about in urban areas? It sounds like most of the contexts you're describing are rural situations. What about ultra poverty in urban areas? Are there programs like this that are working there?
Yes, so BRAC actually is implementing an urban program that is very integrally built on the principles of the graduation program that was pioneered in rural areas. The model is more expensive in urban context, but looks in many ways quite similar, with the exception of the assets really being one of the key differentiating features. So livestock, which is a primary asset in rural areas, really in many cases doesn't factor in the urban context. So in urban, the asset packages that you're looking at are often the sort of bundle of small petty trade goods, your initial inventory, and perhaps sort of help securing a place in your slum area to sell some of those goods in a petty trade operation. You also have a lot of women who sort of do door-to-door sales of things like biscuits and chai and things like that. And in some cases, you might have, if a person is skilled, perhaps as someone who has been involved in some way with the garment industry, the asset transfer can become something like a sewing machine. So in those ways, the model is a little bit different, but in terms of sort of some of the cost tweaking that has to happen with when you don't have access to sort of large spaces to convene people, when you have to sort of work within the construct of a very different sort of spatial arrangement than you have in rural areas, the model shifts a bit. But we're in our piloting of the program. We have a pilot now that's I believe reaching 3,000 with plans to scale up in urban areas as well.
And do you use the poverty committee in the rural areas? In the urban areas as well?
We do that in the urban areas as well.
Oh, great. All right. Well, I know we didn't get to all the questions, but we got to as many many as we could, and with the time we had and a little more. I want to give my deep thanks to Sadna, to Corinne, and to Raymond for your participation, for a great discussion. And I want to encourage all of those who are still on to, if you want to look into the graduation model, we'll post the slides and other things on our website. If you want to learn more, you can follow up on Sadna's offer to provide assistance to organizations that want to implement this in their own programs. One more announcement from Microcredit Summit campaign is that the 17th Microcredit Summit will take place in Merida, Mexico on September 3 to 5. The theme is Generation Next, Innovations in Microfinance, and looking at things like the graduation program for serving the ultra poor is one of the things we're going to focus on. We're going to look at in the next generation, what are the things that are going to help eliminate severe poverty, and this is one of the models that we want to talk about there. So we welcome you all there. Thank you for participating on this call. Thanks for the great questions, and thank you to the great panelists for your participation.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for facilitating and organizing.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, Raymond. Thanks for staying on.